in other words, what do I consider the source of my strength, in order to keep going? I would say part of it for sure is calling. In other words, I feel this is what I'm supposed to be doing. In religious life, this is what we all try to find our vocation, but I feel this is what I'm supposed to be doing. It feels it's the right thing, and there's a lot of strength you feel when you feel like you're on the right track. First of all, Secondly, like I said, hope and humor are really, really essential. And anyway, in my family, we've always had that, fortunately, And my mother, who died very recently, also showed all the way through both her hope and her humor. In other words, I could see it more clearly, because she was in front of her own earthquake, you know what I mean? So I think just character-wise, it's a little bit easier when you're, that's your personality, kind of a way to be optimistic and hopeful. It helps a lot. But for sure, hands down, for sure, when you know people there, and when you work together, especially on tough things, and in spite of lots and lots of difficulties, even can advance a half an inch in 2 years, it's very satisfying, and you have wonderful friends, and they wouldn't leave you for a minute, to do a difficult thing on your own, and you wouldn't leave them for a minute to do a difficult thing on their own. You see what I mean? And I just think when you're in that kind of a thing, it's just automatic. You keep going. But for sure, it all has a faith base. And this is what I was talking about last night with the Passionist Associates, because we in the world has a very cheap understanding of suffering and diminishment. It's basically that it shouldn't exist. It's an affront to us. We have to deny it and run from it. But I think anybody that has been in a real difficult situation with faith has found that while it has been a burden, that terrible things are never fun. But while it has been a burden, it has been more a blessing than a burden. And this is really the point of our faith, that terrible thing that happened to our Lord, that's an assassination, and a brutal assassination, that the terrible thing, as burdensome as it was, became a blessing, because that's what God does. When God finds situations intolerable, that's what God does. If you do your best to bring God into it, which is God's way, from free will. It's how it laid out from the first page of the Bible. It's made this way. For some reason, it's really important to God that we help God to do it. You see what I mean? So when we will go to the place of burden, somebody else's, and when we're not afraid to face our own burden with somebody else, then God knows what to do from there. It becomes a place of blessing. I told the story last night, and I want to tell you because it gives just this point. During those terrible years, 2004 to 2007, we saw a lot of diabolic things, and we picked up a lot of terribly, terribly killed people and tortured people on the streets. And one day I was going to San Fil to the sisters to work. I went 3 times a week there, and they have barn loads of destitute sick people, barn loads. And I came to a certain crossing, and there was a body burning there. And I had some foreigners, Americans with me, and of course that limits anything I can do right away because I have to, worry about their safety. So I drove the rest of the way to the sisters, and I said to the sisters, I need 5 buckets, 5-gallon buckets. I need 5 of them full of water. And please keep these people here and keep them safe. I have to go back up the street, and I have to put out a body that's burning and claim the body. And the sisters, true to themselves, would not let me go on my own and filled the water fast, but they were coming with me, and they came with me. And so we put out the fire. I can still have nightmares. I still hear the sound when the water and smell I have nightmares about it. We put him out. And I have always used body bags as a pall. They're white. And I've always made sure the body bags are clean, So I brought 5 body bags because the place was filthy from his blood, from the fire, from the ashes, from the water, from the mud. And I laid out 5, a good distance from each other, because I was going to have him in a clean bag. For me, it's the pall. It's the thing the priest puts his hand on the coffin when he says, you shared the waters of baptism, you shared the death of Christ, and now we beg God that you can share in the resurrection. So it has to be clean. So we did that. We lifted his body 5 times. We put him in the truck, and like we usually do, anybody who was there just looking, rubbernecking, we invite them over to have a prayer. But of course, these rubberneckers were the killers. This was the gang that killed him. These were the people that burned him, But what are you going to do? Make them vanish? You know what I mean? You have to try to steer the whole thing towards the right way, Anyway, so we had the prayer, and then we took his body down to the sisters, and the sisters buried him. In the afternoon, the superior, Sister Patsy, she called me on the cell phone, which has always been the only phone that works there, and she said to me, you're never going to guess what happened. I said, what? She said, this lady came so sheepishly, careful, scared, looking every way, and she came to the convent, and she came to me and she said, I recognize you. You were there this morning. And she said, where? And she said, when they buried my son. We thought he was a man. He was just a huge kid. He was, 18, 19-year-old kid. What had happened was, when this gang attacked him, somebody ran to the shack of the mother and they said, they're beating your son. And she started winding her way up through all the corridors, running there. But by the time she got where she could see, it was a nightmare. The nightmare of any parent, the death of their child, but especially a brutal way, And she said she stood there and she wanted to run and her legs wouldn't move and she wanted to shout and she had no words. And in her mind, she just felt herself like going into nothing, darkness. And she said, then all of a sudden, I saw a truck come, and the truck stopped, and the truck looked, and the truck went, And I stood there, and all of a sudden, the truck came back with more people than was in it before, because it was the sisters. And she said, everything that I would have done, they did it. They put the fire out, of my son's body. They lifted him 5 times. She kept saying that. 5 times they lifted him up until he was in a clean sheet. She thought they were sheets. 5 times they picked him up, you see. And then they had a prayer, you see. So she came to the sister, and she got on her knees to the sister, and she kissed her hand to thank her, you see. And sister was calling me to tell me this thing. And I said, of all the feelings that lady has a right to, you would never think gratitude would be one of them. And I said to the sister, we weren't there in time to stop the killing. We weren't even there to try to save him. We didn't raise him from the dead. We didn't arrest the killers. I mean, we did almost nothing. But what we did meant everything to the deepest part of that woman. Do you see what I mean? It meant everything to the deepest part. Since then, we always call that the countersign on my team. You always put the countersign. If it's wrong, you do the right thing, and you do it immediately, because it unleashes power in people. Do you see what I mean? You don't know what change of thinking or change of heart it might even start with the gang, for example.